Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She had flown more missions than half of them combined, carried scars from skis that most of these recruits would never see. And yet when she walked in, their conversations fell silent, not out of respect but out of dismissal. They averted their eyes, whispered behind folders, let the awkward space around her grow heavier by the second. She sat, shoulders squared, jaw firm, the only sound her steady breath against the faint hum of the projector. Captain Alana Reed, call sign, Valkyrie, a legend in the skis, reduced in this room to a shadow nobody wanted to acknowledge. It hadn't always been this way. She once belonged here. Once her name meant something. But names wear thin when politics sharpen their edges. She sat quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of her flight manual, pretending not to notice the sidelong looks, pretending not to feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her chest, because she knew what was coming, and pretending was the only armor she had left. The Admiral entered, Admiral Warren. His medals caught the fluorescent lights, his shoes striking the floor in a cadence so precise it almost sounded rehearsed. He didn't look at her, didn't have to. His decision had already been made. He carried it in his stride in the way his gaze cut past her as if she wasn't even breathing the same air. His voice filled the room, sharp, commanding, leaving no room for doubt. And then it landed on her like a gavel. "You're done here." The words echoed louder than the thunder rumbling beyond the hangar doors. Every head snapped up. The recruits stiffened. Airmen lowered their gazes. Even the hardened SEALs scattered in the back went still. Nobody spoke. Nobody questioned. Because when the Admiral spoke, his word was law. Alana didn't move at first. The sting of the words settled slow, like shards of glass under her skin. She forced herself to swallow, forced herself not to let her face betray anything. Her father's voice whispered from memory, "Never let them see you break." Her mother's advice, softer, layered over it, "Dignity isn't in what you say, it's in what you refuse to say." She clung to both. "Yes, sir," she answered. Her voice did not tremble. That at least was hers to keep. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the faint rain now tapping against the metal roof. The Admiral's lips tightened. He nodded once, dismissive, and turned away as if the matter were already forgotten. For him, maybe it was. For her, it was another wound stitched onto years of sacrifice. She stood, lifting her duffel bag slowly, every motion controlled. She adjusted the strap across her shoulder, forcing her step steady, refusing to let them see the heaviness in her chest. Not yet. Not here. Her boots echoed on the wet pavement outside, the storm building, the scent of jet fuel and rain mixing into something raw and metallic. She didn't look back. What was there to look back to? A squadron she had led through fire. A uniform that meant less than the ink on a report. She was walking away not from duty, but from a stage where politics drowned out loyalty, where rank mattered more than truth. "Captain Reed," a voice barked. Not the Admiral this time, but a young lieutenant echoing orders that weren't his own. "You'll surrender your credentials at the gate." She paused only for a heartbeat, then continued. She didn't turn, she didn't answer. What was left to say? The rain came heavier now, dripping down her flight jacket, seeping into her collar. Lightning split the sky, casting shadows across the line of silent aircraft. And then it happened. From the far end of the hangar, movement caught her eye. A row of men, rugged, mud-stained, carrying the kind of scars only war can leave. Navy SEALs. They hadn't heard the Admiral's words. They didn't need to. What they saw was enough: the patch on her jacket, the faint letters stenciled across her bag. Valkyrie. Her call sign whispered among them like a rumor, then like a wave spreading fast. One by one, their faces hardened with recognition. One by one, they raised their hands, saluting. The sound of it, the sharp snap of palms to brows, cut through the storm. The Admiral froze mid-step, his boots splashing in a shallow puddle. His eyes darted across the line of men, confusion tightening into disbelief. He turned back to the figure he had just dismissed, and for the first time his composure faltered. Because respect isn't commanded, it's earned. And what stood before him was not just a dismissed officer, but a legend the battlefield itself had named. Alana stopped. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head, the rain washing across her face. Her eyes met his, not with anger, not with defiance, but with the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. Her silence spoke louder than any rebuttal, louder than any defense. And in that silence, the truth weighed heavier than his command. The moment stretched, unbearable in its stillness. The recruits shifted uneasily. The lieutenant swallowed hard. The SEALs held their salute, unmoving, unblinking. The Admiral's jaw tightened, but no words came. Because what could he say? Authority could strip rank. Paperwork could erase records, but none of it could erase the memory of those who owed their lives to the pilot they called Valkyrie. The rain beat harder. Her bag felt heavier on her shoulder, though she bore it without flinching. She took a single breath and turned again, resuming her walk. Her boots splashed through puddles, steady, unhurried, each step a defiance without needing to declare itself. She didn't need their permission to leave. She didn't need their recognition to carry the truth of who she was. But behind her, the salutes remained. And that was enough. The story does not begin with dismissal, though. It begins long before, with a girl in a small town, far from airfields and admirals, where the world was quiet except for the rumble of Friday night football games and the laughter echoing from county fairs. Alana Reed had not been born into uniforms or medals. Her father was a mechanic, his hands always stained with oil, teaching her that engines were more than steel. They were hearts waiting to be understood. Her mother was a teacher, her lessons soft, steady, reminding her that wisdom wasn't loud but patient. She wasn't supposed to find war. War found her. At 19, restless, searching for something bigger than small-town roads and familiar faces, she enlisted. Not out of a dream of glory, but from an ache she couldn't name, a pull toward skis she hadn't yet touched. At 22, she was already flying combat missions, her hands gripping controls that responded like extensions of her own will. Every flight etched something deeper into her, sharpening her courage, testing her resolve. But courage doesn't shout. It whispers. It's the voice that tells you to keep flying when every instinct begs you to turn back. It's the silence you hold when others doubt you, when orders conflict with humanity. And it was that silence, that stubborn insistence on life over protocol, that would make her both revered and resented. Her call sign was born in fire. Over the skis of Syria, a squad of Marines was pinned down, surrounded, hopeless. Anti-aircraft fire laced the sky like a trap. Every second counted. Every pilot hesitated, except her. Alana pushed through, cutting across the barrage, her jet weaving like a phantom. She struck, circled, struck again. She stayed until the last Marine was out. And when she landed, drenched in sweat, her hands trembling from the surge of adrenaline, one of those Marines had looked at her with disbelief and awe. "She came down like a Valkyrie," he muttered, and the name stuck. But names carry weight, and weight attracts enemies, not only in the skis but in the halls where power thrives on obedience. She believed in people. Admiral Warren believed in rules. Their collision was inevitable. And though she never sought the fight, she knew deep down that one day the storm wouldn't just rage outside the hangar, it would break within. And that day had come. Only now, walking across the drenched pavement, her career stripped, her rank dissolved, she realized something the Admiral never could. They could take her wings, they could take her title, but they could never take the salutes that came unbidden, the respect that lived not in paper but in memory. And yet what she hadn't told them, what even the Admiral didn't know, was that her story wasn't over. Not yet. She stood alone in the rain, but what came next, no one expected. That night after leaving the base, Alana didn't drive far. The rain blurred the road ahead, windshield wipers struggling to keep pace, her headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. Her duffel sat on the passenger seat, heavier than it should have been, not because of what it carried, but because of what it meant. Every patch, every folded uniform inside, it was her past stuffed into a bag, sealed and silent. She drove without music. The only rhythm was the hum of the tires on wet asphalt and the quiet war raging inside her chest. Where do you go when everything you are has been stripped away? She pulled into a motel off the highway, the kind of place that smelled faintly of mildew and stale coffee. She carried her bag inside, set it down on the thin carpet and sat on the edge of the bed. Her reflection in the cracked mirror stared back, eyes rimmed red, hair damp from the storm, shoulders squared out of habit even here in solitude. She pulled her jacket tighter and whispered into the silence, "It's over." But the words felt like lies. Sleep didn't come, memories did. She saw herself at 19, standing in line at the recruitment office, nervous but stubborn, her palms sweating as she signed papers she barely understood. She saw her first flight, how her heart had pounded, not from fear but from exhilaration. She saw the Marines waving at her jet, their voices over the radio cracking with relief when her strikes cut through enemy fire. She saw faces of the fallen too, men and women she couldn't save, names she still carried. Those memories didn't vanish with a dismissal order. They lived, sharper than ever in the quiet of that motel room. She buried her face in her hands, not crying, just tired. Tired in a way sleep could never fix. By dawn she was back on the road. Not toward home, not toward the base, just away. The miles stretched, towns blurring into gas stations and fast food chains, landscapes fading into gray. She didn't know what she was chasing. Maybe she wasn't chasing anything at all. Maybe she was running. But word spreads faster in the military than storms across open skis. And while she drove, conversations were unfolding elsewhere, rooms she wasn't in, men she hadn't spoken to in months. In a dim barracks half a world away, a squad of SEALs sat in silence. Their leader, a man with scars across his cheek and steel in his eyes, broke it. "You hear about Valkyrie?" The room stilled. Nods, mutters, disbelief. One man spat on the floor, another shook his head. "They kicked her out." Silence again. Then one of them said what they all thought but none wanted to admit. "If they don't want her, they're fools, but if we ever need her," his voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken truth. They all knew they would call. Back on the road, Alana pulled into a diner, neon lights flickering above the entrance. The waitress poured her coffee without asking, her eyes tired but kind. Alana muttered thanks, stirring sugar into the steaming cup. She didn't notice the man in the corner at first. Older, weathered, his eyes sharp but softened by age. He wore no uniform, but his posture betrayed years of service. He studied her in silence until she finally looked his way. "You're Valkyrie," he said simply, not a question. Her hand froze around the cup. She didn't answer. He leaned forward. "I was there. Kandahar, 2011, my convoy. You flew over us when nobody else would." Her chest tightened. She remembered. Not faces, not names, but the mission. The terrain, the fire, the desperate voices over the radio. She nodded once. "You saved my men," he said, voice low, reverent. Then he sat back, his eyes softening. "Don't let them take that from you." She swallowed hard, looked down at the coffee, fighting the tremor in her hands. She wasn't used to gratitude, not directly, not like this. It was easier when the voices came over radio, static, faceless, distant. Easier when she didn't have to carry the weight of their eyes. She left the diner before sunrise, but the man's words clung to her, echoing louder than the Admiral's dismissal. Days blurred into weeks. She rented a small place by the coast, a modest house with peeling paint and creaky floors. She kept to herself, waking with the sun, running along the shoreline until her lungs burned, then staring out at the ocean as if answers could be found in the tide. The quiet should have brought peace. Instead, it brought more memories. Sometimes she dreamed of flying, her hands gripping the throttle, the roar of engines shaking her bones. Other nights, she dreamed of fire and screams, of tracer rounds streaking past her canopy, of radios cutting out mid-call. She woke drenched in sweat, fists clenched, breath shallow. She told herself she was done, that she was just Alana now, no ranks, no call signs, but the truth lingered. She was still Valkyrie, she couldn't outrun it. And somewhere across the ocean the storm was gathering, a convoy ambushed, communication lines severed, air support grounded, men pinned in hostile terrain, desperate for someone reckless enough, brave enough to fly where no one else dared. Command scrambled, searching through rosters, flipping through names, but every SEAL who knew the terrain said the same thing. One name, one call sign. Valkyrie. But she didn't know that yet. She was still standing barefoot on the cold wooden floor of her small coastal home, staring out at the horizon as gulls cried overhead, trying to convince herself that silence was enough. Yet deep inside she felt it, the pull. The same restless ache that had driven her to enlist at 19, the same whisper that had told her to push through anti-air fire in Syria. It never left. And soon it would call her back. The call came in the middle of the night. Not to her phone, not directly, but to the men who had sworn they would never forget. In a command center halfway across the world, alarms blared, screens flickered red, and voices cracked under the weight of desperation. An Allied convoy was pinned down, surrounded on all sides by hostile fire. The terrain was merciless, canyons twisting like veins, skis thick with threats, escape routes narrowed to choke points. Air support had already failed. Every pilot pulled back. Every option had been marked impossible. But impossible was where Valkyrie lived. In a dusty tent, maps scattered across a table, a group of SEALs leaned in as a colonel spat out the situation. His words came clipped, rehearsed, already defeated. Convoy compromised, casualties mounting, reinforcements delayed. Unless we get immediate air support, they won't last the night. He looked up, waiting for silence to harden into acceptance. But one man, his jaw lined with scars and his eyes sharper than steel, spoke what none dared to say aloud. There's only one pilot who can fly that canyon. The colonel shook his head. She's not on the roster. She's not even in the Air Force anymore. The SEAL didn't blink. Roster or not, you know who I'm talking about. Another man chimed in, voice low. Valkyrie. The name cut the room open. A hush fell, heavy and unyielding. Some men nodded. Others exhaled, relief mixing with disbelief. The colonel tried to object again, but the decision was already moving, spreading faster than orders ever could. They didn't need signatures. They didn't need permission. They needed her. And as the storm raged over foreign skis in a quiet coastal town far removed from the chaos, Alana stood at her kitchen sink, staring out at the ocean. The night was calm here, the waves gentle, the moon painting silver across the water. She should have felt peace. Instead, she felt restless, unsettled, as though the tide itself was whispering her name. She didn't hear the knock at first. The pounding only reached her when it grew urgent, insistent, breaking through her thoughts. She opened the door to find two men standing there. Not recruiters, not officials, SEALs. Their uniforms were dusty, their faces lined with exhaustion, but their eyes held something else, resolve. "We need you," one of them said simply. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "I'm not military anymore." The man shook his head. "Doesn't matter, you're Valkyrie." The words landed like a weight in her chest. She wanted to close the door, wanted to tell them they were wrong, that those days were behind her, but the look in their eyes stopped her. It was the same look she had seen on countless Marines, soldiers, and SEALs, men pinned down, clinging to a sliver of hope. It was the look of someone asking not for orders, not for authority, but for a chance to live. She stepped back, the silence between them enough of an answer. Within hours, she was on a transport plane, duffel at her feet, staring out the window as darkness gave way to dawn. She didn't speak much. Neither did they. But the unspoken truth was clear. This mission wasn't official. It wasn't authorized. It was desperate. At the base overseas, command was chaos. Radios crackled. Officers barked orders that changed by the minute. The convoy's situation was deteriorating by the hour. And then, as Alana stepped onto the tarmac, everything shifted. Soldiers stopped mid-stride, their eyes snapping to the patch on her jacket, to the calm resolve etched into her posture. Whispers spread fast. "Valkyrie." The Admiral was there too, Warren. His eyes widened the moment he saw her step onto the airfield. Shock flashed across his face, then hardened into anger. He stormed toward her, his voice a low growl. "What the hell are you doing here? You're not authorized. You don't belong on this base." She met his fury with silence. The SEAL beside her stepped forward, his voice steady. "With respect, sir, nobody else can do this. She's our only shot." The Admiral's jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, wanted to assert control, but the urgency of the situation shackled him. His pride battled with reality, and for the first time, reality won. He stepped back, his glare never leaving her. Alana turned, walking toward the F-22 waiting at the edge of the runway. Her hands traced the steel as if greeting an old friend. She climbed in, buckled down, adjusted her helmet. For a moment she closed her eyes. The weight of years of dismissal, of doubt pressed in, but beneath it all something steadier rose. The same voice that had carried her through Syria, through Afghanistan, through every firestorm she'd flown into. Her call sign wasn't just a name, it was a promise. The engines roared, thunder rolling across the base. The air vibrated, soldiers freezing as the sound grew, powerful, relentless. Radios lit up. Voices spilled through, urgent, pleading, desperate. She pulled the throttle, the jet screaming down the runway, lifting into skies already heavy with danger. On the ground, the SEALs loaded up, their convoy crawling through the canyon's teeth. Fire erupted from ridges. Bullets carved sparks into armored vehicles. Men shouted into radios, their calls jagged with panic. And then, her voice. Calm, steady, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This is Valkyrie. Eyes up, I've got you." Every man stilled. Hearts slowed just for a moment because they knew that voice, knew what it meant. And as tracer fire lit the skis, she dove into the storm. But she hadn't told them everything. Not yet. Not about the cost of coming back. Not about the weight still pressing down on her chest. She wasn't sure if this mission would end in triumph or in silence. All she knew was that she couldn't turn away. Not now. Not when lives hung in the balance. And as the canyon walls closed in around her, as missiles streaked past her wings, Alana Reed, Valkyrie, tightened her grip on the controls and whispered to herself, "Not today. Not while I'm still flying." Tracer fire lit the canyon like a storm of fireflies, only deadlier, faster, merciless. Every second was a gamble, every breath borrowed against the weight of gravity and enemy intent. Alana gripped the controls of her F-22, her pulse steady despite the chaos closing in. The walls of the canyon rose like jagged teeth around her, radar screaming warnings, missiles streaking past her wings. She tuned out the noise, focused only on the men on the ground. "Convoy, this is Valkyrie. Mark your position with smoke. Copy." Static crackled, then a voice broke through, strange, sharp, almost drowned by gunfire. "Valkyrie, this is Hammer 1. Copy. Green smoke out." Her eyes scanned the terrain until she saw it, a thin plume rising through the haze of dust and fire. She banked hard, the jet shuddering under the strain, the canyon walls a blur of rock and shadow. She dove low, so low her wingtips nearly kissed the stone. Alarms blared, telling her to pull up, pull away, retreat. She ignored them. "Hang tight," she said, voice calm though her chest burned. "I see you." On the ground, the SEALs tightened their grip on weapons, ducking behind smoking vehicles, bullets slicing through the air. And then it came, the roar. The sound that shook the canyon, vibrating through their bones. Her jet streaked overhead, a thunderclap wrapped in steel and fire. Missiles locked, streaked, detonated along the ridges, scattering enemy fire into chaos. Dust and flames swallowed the cliffs as Alana pulled up, her heart pounding but her tone unshaken. "Path's clear, move now." The convoy surged forward, tires grinding over loose rock, engines groaning under the weight of speed and desperation. SEALs leapt from cover, covering each other, eyes darting to the sky where their unlikely guardian wove through fire. But it wasn't enough. For every ridge she cleared, another lit up. For every path opened, another choke point slammed shut. The enemy had planned this ambush well, and as her radar lit up again, red after red, she felt the edges of doubt gnawing at her. She had been gone too long, out of practice, out of rhythm. Was she still Valkyrie, or just Alana Reed, dismissed, forgotten, trying to claw back into skis that no longer wanted her? The thought almost broke her focus. Almost. Valkyrie, we're pinned again, a voice shouted over the radio. Gunfire rattled in the background. We're not going to. No, she cut in sharply. You're going to make it. Stay low, mark the ridge. A flare shot skyward, red against the gray haze. She dove, missiles chasing her tail. One clipped close, too close. Her jet rocked, alarms screaming, fire licking across her right wing. She clenched her teeth, fought the controls, leveled out just before the canyon wall rushed up to meet her. Sweat stung her eyes. Her breath came ragged. Damage? A voice asked over comms, panicked. I'm fine, she lied. But her hands shook. Not from fear, but from the memory it dragged up. The last time fire had kissed her wings, the last time she'd barely made it back. The memory of the friend she hadn't saved. A co-pilot years ago whose name still echoed in her dreams. The weight of it pressed in now, louder than the alarms. She had promised herself she wouldn't fly reckless again, that no more names would be written in silence because of her. But looking at the convoy below, trapped between death and stone, she knew promises bend in the face of duty. She banked again, ignoring the damage, ignoring the risk. She dove straight into the teeth of fire, unleashing missiles in a torrent that shook the canyon itself. Explosions ripped through enemy positions, the shockwave rattling even the bones of men who had thought themselves safe. Convoy go, she shouted. This is your window, move. Engines roared, vehicles surged, men ran. And for a brief moment the canyon cleared. For a heartbeat, survival felt possible. But Alana knew better. The canyon wasn't done with them. On the ridges ahead, enemy reinforcements gathered. Heavy firepower, more than she had ammunition for. She saw it all on her radar, bright red signatures blooming like wounds across the screen. Her chest tightened. This was the breaking point. She could pull back, preserve her jet, keep herself alive, or she could press forward, bleed her last missile into the fight and pray it would be enough. Her voice came calm over the comms, but inside it was breaking. Hammer one, keep pushing. No matter what, don't stop. The SEAL commander on the ground, his voice gravel, unyielding, answered. Copy, Valkyrie, we trust you. Trust? The word cut through her like a blade. They still trusted her, even after the dismissal, even after the silence, even after she had tried to leave it all behind. She steadied her breath, fingers tightening on the trigger. Then hold on, she whispered. She pulled the jet into a climb, then dove again, her last missiles streaking like burning stars toward the ridges. Explosions tore through the enemy line, the canyon itself shaking under the impact. Smoke blanketed the cliffs, hiding the convoy's movement, shielding them just long enough to break free of the kill zone. Alana's jet shuddered. The damage caught up, systems flickered, alarms screamed louder. She wrestled the controls, heart hammering, knowing she had pushed the machine to its edge. Valkyrie status, a voice demanded. She hesitated, her vision blurred, her chest burned. Still flying, she answered finally, voice softer now. Always. The convoy cleared the canyon, engines howling into open ground. Relief surged through their ranks, but it wasn't celebration, it was survival, and they knew who to thank for it. On the ground, the SEAL commander looked up, eyes narrowing against the smoke and sky. He whispered the name like a prayer, Valkyrie. But high above, inside the battered jet, Alana's breath hitched. She had saved them, yes, but she felt it deep inside. This was only the beginning. The canyon wasn't her battle, not truly. The real battle was still waiting. And it wasn't out there. It was in here inside her chest, where the weight of every choice, every loss, every silence still lived. She steadied her hands on the controls, eyes fixed on the horizon. The mission wasn't over, not for them, not for her. And she wasn't done yet. The canyon was behind them, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that clung to men after chaos, heavy with what might have been, fragile in its stillness. The convoy rumbled across open ground, engines strained, tires chewing dirt, survivors clutching their rifles with white knuckles. No cheers, no relief, just the stunned quiet of men who knew they should be dead and weren't. Above them, Alana's F-22 limped through the sky. Warning lights glowed like a fever across her cockpit, systems failing one by one. Her right wing bore the black kiss of fire, smoke trailing faintly behind her. She tightened her grip on the controls, every muscle burning to keep the machine steady. She whispered to herself, a mantra through clenched teeth. "Not yet, not here, hold together." Her voice broke through the convoy's comms, low but steady. "Hammer 1, report." The SEAL commander answered, gravel in his tone. "Convoy intact, minimal casualties, we're still rolling." He hesitated, then added softly, "Because of you." She didn't respond. Couldn't. Praise was harder to carry than fire. At the forward operating base, chaos had shifted to stunned stillness. Men crowded radios, eyes glued to screens tracking her signal. Some whispered her call sign like a secret prayer. Others shook their heads, disbelief etched deep. And in the center of it all stood Admiral Warren. He had watched the feeds, heard her voice crackle through speakers, calm where chaos screamed. He had seen the impossible unfold on maps, routes cleared, convoy saved, enemy positions crushed. All from the pilot he had dismissed with a single order. His jaw tightened. His chest rose and fell unevenly. Around him, soldiers muttered her name with reverence, not fear. And in that moment he understood something he had never wanted to face. Authority could dictate, authority could punish, but authority could not erase respect. He turned away from the screens, his hands clasped behind his back. His face betrayed nothing, but inside doubt gnawed. Alana circled once more above the convoy, her jet coughing warnings, then set her course back toward the base. The landing would be brutal, she knew it. The right systems were gone, hydraulics bleeding, stability compromised. But she had landed worse, or so she told herself. The base came into view. Fire trucks lined the strip, medics stood ready. Soldiers lined the edges, word of her return spreading faster than orders. The runway stretched out, slick with dust, unforgiving. She steadied her breath, adjusted her approach, whispered once more, "Hold together." The jet screamed as it touched down, wheels biting, metal shrieking. Smoke burst from the undercarriage, sparks clawing the asphalt. The plane shuddered, veered, threatened to collapse. But she held fast, fought the stick, muscles screaming with the strain. And then it stopped. Broken, battered, but alive. The canopy lifted. For a moment she sat still, her chest heaving, sweat dripping, helmet heavy on her head. Then she pulled it off, letting the cool air sting her face. The silence outside cracked. Applause rose, not rehearsed, not ordered, but raw. Soldiers, mechanics, medics, all clapping, their faces lit with something between awe and gratitude. She climbed down, boots hitting the tarmac hard, legs trembling though she forced them steady. The SEAL commander was there, his uniform dusted with ash, his face cut with lines of exhaustion. He saluted her, crisp, sharp, deliberate. Behind him, every SEAL followed. Their hands rose in unison, eyes locked on her, silent acknowledgement of a debt no metal could measure. She froze, her chest tightening. She wanted to look away, to wave it off, but she couldn't. Their salutes weren't about her rank. They were about survival, about respect earned in fire, about memory that no dismissal could erase. And then the crowd parted. The Admiral stepped forward, his expression unreadable, his posture stiff. He stopped in front of her, silence stretching taut between them. For a moment, neither spoke. When he finally did, his voice was lower, stripped of its sharpness. "You disobeyed orders, again." Her jaw tightened, she didn't answer. He studied her, his eyes flickering with something almost human, conflict perhaps, or regret. And yet, he looked over his shoulder at the SEALs, still saluting, at the convoy survivors stumbling from transports, at the mechanics staring in reverence. "Without you, they'd be gone." She held his gaze, unflinching. Rain from the night before seemed still etched into her bones, washing between them in silence. Finally, he stepped back. "You're dismissed from my command," he said, voice stiff again. But then he added words that made the air itself pause. but not from theirs. He turned away before she could answer, his shoulders rigid, his pride still intact, but fractured now, cracked in ways no rank could hide. That night, alone in her quarters, Alana sat by the window, staring at the dark horizon. The room was quiet, but her mind was. She replayed every moment of the canyon, every risk, every near miss. And beneath it all, she heard the echo of a voice long gone, her co-pilot, the one she couldn't save. She closed her eyes, tears she had long denied pressing hot against her lashes. "I tried," she whispered. "I still try." The truth cut deep. Survival always came with ghosts. Every life saved was shadowed by the lives lost, and no victory erased that weight. Yet as she sat there, she felt something shift inside. Not forgiveness, not peace, but a fragile thread of purpose. Because for the first time since her dismissal, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was still Valkyrie. And whether the Admiral admitted it or not, the battlefield had called her back. But deep down, she knew this was no ending. The mission in the canyon was just a warning shot. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a greater storm was waiting. And when it came, they would call her name again. The storm came sooner than anyone expected. 2 days after the convoy rescue, the forward base buzzed with restless energy. Radios chattered nonstop, drones fed jagged images to flickering screens, and the air tasted of dust and tension. A new offensive was unfolding, larger, sharper, designed not to ambush a convoy but to cripple everything the Allied presence stood for. Villages were burning, supply routes shredded, communications under siege. Alana watched it unfold from the edges of the command tent, her arms folded, her jacket still smelling faintly of jet fuel and smoke. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near command decisions. But her presence was tolerated now, reluctantly, because the men who had survived owed their lives to her. Admiral Warren paced the front of the tent, his voice clipped, his temper frayed. He rattled off strategies, airstrikes, troop movements, his words efficient but hollow. He never looked at her, not once, but she could feel his awareness of her, heavy and unspoken, like a shadow he couldn't shake. When the briefing ended, men shuffled out, their eyes flicking toward her with a mixture of gratitude and quiet expectation. She stayed behind, alone with the Admiral. "You don't belong here," he said finally, his tone flat. She didn't answer. "You were dismissed. You're a civilian. I can't have you running missions like this is some." He stopped, grinding his teeth, searching for a word that didn't sound like an admission. "Like this is your war to fight." Alana met his gaze, calm, steady. "It's not my war, it's theirs. And if they call me, I won't turn away." The Admiral's face tightened, but for a flicker of a second, his eyes betrayed something else. Not anger, not disdain, weariness, maybe even fear. He turned away before she could read more. That night she sat outside the barracks, watching the stars burn cold above the desert. Sleep wouldn't come. Not after the canyon. Not after the whispers that reached her every hour, SEALs passing by, mechanics tipping their heads, young recruits whispering Valkyrie like it was a myth brought to life. She didn't want it. Not the name, not the weight, not the silent reverence. But she couldn't give it back either. Her hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, something she hadn't done in years. She drew the smoke deep, not for calm, but for the harshness of it, the sting in her lungs reminding her she was still alive. She exhaled, her breath mixing with desert wind, and thought of the man she'd lost, the co-pilot whose laugh used to fill cockpits, whose steady hand had balanced her recklessness. She remembered his last words, cut short by fire. She remembered the silence that followed, a silence that still lived inside her. She closed her eyes. "I can't keep carrying this alone," she whispered, but the night gave no answer. At dawn, the alarm sounded again. Intelligence poured in. Enemy forces were advancing on a critical outpost, a communications hub that tied every Allied unit in the region together. If it fell, the whole front would collapse. Command scrambled. Pilots hesitated. SEALs prepared for a suicide defense. and then her name surfaced, not from her lips, from theirs. The SEAL commander, scarred, unyielding, stood in the tent, his voice steady. "We want Valkyrie leading this op." Murmurs erupted. Some nodded instantly. Others balked, glancing toward the Admiral. Warren's jaw clenched so hard it seemed it might crack. "She's not in command," he snapped. The commander didn't flinch. "Respectfully, sir, neither are we. Not out there. Out there it's her voice that keeps men alive." The room stilled. Soldiers exchanged looks, waiting for the Admiral to shut it down. Instead, his silence stretched, brittle, cracking under the weight of truth. Finally, he exhaled, sharp and bitter. "Fine, but this is on her." Alana didn't speak. She just nodded once, the quiet acceptance of someone who had never needed permission. Preparation was swift. She climbed back into gear, her jacket snug, helmet under her arm. Mechanics swarmed her jet, patching damage, rearming with every missile the base could spare. She walked the tarmac, boots steady, eyes forward. SEALs loaded into transports, their faces tight but calmer than they should have been, because they knew who was flying cover. And though she carried herself steady inside, the storm churned. Doubt, fear, the ghosts of every life she hadn't saved whispering warnings in the back of her mind. She tightened her fists until her knuckles ached, forcing herself to breathe. The engines roared again, filling the sky with thunder. Her voice crackled over comms as the mission began. "Convoy Valkyrie, stay tight, keep your spacing, eyes forward, we'll carve the path." The SEALs answered in unison, "Copy, Valkyrie." And for a moment, something stirred in her chest, not pride, not arrogance, but something quieter, a reminder. She wasn't flying for medals, not for ranks, not even for redemption. She was flying for them. The desert stretched endless beneath her wings, the horizon burning with smoke and fire. Ahead, the outpost waited, already under siege, already buckling. She tightened her grip on the controls, her heart a steady drum. And she whispered to herself, soft but certain, "Not while I'm still flying." The sky lit up as the battle began. The sky erupted before they even reached the outpost. Missiles streaked upward from hidden ridges, tracer fire carving the dawn into jagged scars of red and orange. Alana's radar bloomed with threats, too many too close. She banked hard, the F-22 rolling into a dive that pressed her chest into the seat, alarms screaming in protest. "Convoy break left. Keep formation tight," she ordered, voice calm though her pulse thundered. Below, the SEALs clung to their vehicles as rounds rained down. The desert floor spat dust and fire, tires bouncing over jagged rock. Through it all, her voice cut steady. "You're fine. I've got you." Her first strike hit clean, missiles tearing into an enemy nest perched high above the canyon mouth. The blast shook the ridge, scattering fighters like leaves. She pulled up hard, breath-catching, the horizon tilting violently. Every move demanded precision, but more than that, it demanded nerve. She thought of her co-pilot again. His laughter when she pushed maneuvers too far, his calm corrections when she lost patience. The memory haunted her now, every near miss dragging his ghost closer. She blinked it back, forced herself into the present. The men below didn't need her memories. They needed her fire. "Valkyrie, right flank lighting us up," a voice barked. She turned fast, her jet screaming across the sky. A burst of cannon fire shredded the ridge, the roar echoing across the valley. She didn't celebrate. She didn't have time. Another threat blinked onto her radar, then another. They were everywhere, closing in. On the ground, the SEAL commander bellowed over comms. "We're pinned. We won't reach the outpost." Her hands tightened on the stick. She could hear it in their voices, the cracks of fear, the weight of inevitability. They were outnumbered, outgunned. Without her, they wouldn't make it. But she couldn't be everywhere at once. Not fast enough. Not strong enough. The truth slammed into her. She couldn't save them all. The thought nearly broke her. Every instinct screamed to deny it, to fight harder, to bleed herself dry until the sky itself collapsed. But she had learned painfully that recklessness had a cost. She could only carve a path. They would have to walk it. She steadied her breath. Hammer 1, listen carefully. I'll draw fire, you push forward, do not stop. The commander cursed under his breath. That's suicide. She almost smiled. So was flying into that canyon. Then she dove. Her jet roared, engines screaming as she dropped to near ground level, weaving through enemy fire like a phantom. Every gun turned skyward, every rocket chased her streak across the horizon. She became the storm, every maneuver daring the world to end her. Go, she shouted into the comms, now. The convoy surged forward, tires chewing dirt, men firing from windows, pushing through the opening she carved with blood and fire. Behind them the desert erupted, explosions chasing their wheels, smoke swallowing their trail. But she couldn't look back. She was too deep now, her jet twisting through fire that grew heavier by the second. A missile clipped her tail, the shock rattling her bones, flames licking across her fuselage. Her body slammed against the harness, ribs aching, vision flashing white. She forced the plane upright, fighting controls that no longer obeyed cleanly. Her breath tore ragged from her chest. Her voice, though, stayed calm. Convoy status. Static, then the commander's voice broke through, hoarse, strained. We're through, approaching the outpost, still moving. Relief flooded her, sharp and fleeting. She bought them time, that was enough. But the fight wasn't finished. The outpost itself was under siege, smoke curling from its perimeter, Allied defenders pinned inside. If the SEALs reached it only to find it broken, the mission would collapse. Alana climbed, her jet shuddering, wings scorched, systems flickering like dying stars. She scanned the field, eyes narrowing. Enemy armor circled the outpost like vultures, heavy guns pounding its walls. She had one missile left, one chance. She locked, fired, watched the rocket streak down and tear through the largest tank, the explosion shaking the desert floor. Shouts echoed over comms as defenders inside the outpost rallied, surging against the distraction. Her jet screamed warnings, fuel low, hydraulics bleeding, systems critical. She exhaled slowly. Copy outpost, you're clear to hold. And then the world jolted. Another missile struck, close, too close. The blast hurled her sideways, alarms shrieking, cockpit shaking like it would rip apart. Her vision blurred. Her breath tore shallow. She fought the controls with everything left in her. She knew what was coming. The jet wouldn't last. She could feel it, the machine buckling under forces it couldn't bear. Her hand hovered over the ejection lever. One pull and she'd live. Maybe. But the sky wasn't done with her. The mission wasn't finished. The SEALs still needed cover, the outpost still needed fire. If she left now, they might not make it. Her chest ached with the weight of the choice. Survival or sacrifice, self or duty. And then softly she heard his voice again, her co-pilot, from a memory so deep it felt alive. Fly it until it's done. Her jaw tightened. She pulled the jet upright, ignoring every scream from the cockpit, every plea from her body to let go. She steadied her breath, whispered into the comms, "Hold fast, I'm still here." The SEAL commander's reply came rough, heavy with something unspoken. "God bless you, Valkyrie." Her eyes burned, not from smoke, from something deeper. The outpost loomed closer, its walls holding, its defenders surging. The convoy broke through, survivors pouring inside, voices over comms erupting with desperate gratitude. She had given them that chance. She had flown it until it was done. But the cost was still coming. She could feel it in the trembling of her jet, in the tightening of her chest, in the silence that followed as the sky itself seemed to wait for her next move. And she wondered, not for the first time, if dignity meant more in how you lived, or in how you chose to fall. The jet trembled like a wounded animal, every warning light burning red, every alarm a countdown to the inevitable. Alana's hands gripped the controls, muscles aching, lungs burning with shallow breaths. The desert stretched endless below, but her horizon was narrowing. One choice, one final act, one last defiance. Inside the outpost, chaos had turned to stunned survival. The SEALs had broken through, dragging wounded, shouting orders, reinforcing walls that should have already collapsed. Radios crackled with her voice, steady and unwavering despite the fire tearing her jet apart. Convoy secured, outpost holding. The defenders cheered. Some shouted her call sign like a battle cry, others whispered it like a prayer, Valkyrie. And in the command tent miles away, Admiral Warren stood frozen, headset pressed tight, every syllable of her voice carving through his pride. He had dismissed her, cast her aside, tried to erase her from the very skis that now bent to her will. Yet here she was, broken jet and all, holding the line that his polished strategies had failed to protect. One of the officers leaned toward him. "Sir, she's not going to make it back." The Admiral's throat tightened. For once no orders came, no corrections, just silence. Above the desert, Alana steadied her breath. Her last missile was gone, her cannons nearly empty. The F-22 buckled under her weight, metal groaning, hydraulics bleeding. She could eject. She could survive, maybe. But below, enemy reinforcements were gathering again, preparing to strike the outpost in one final push. If she left now, they'd fall. Her hand hovered over the lever. Her heart pounded. The ghost of her co-pilot whispered again, softer this time, "Fly it until it's done." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile born not of joy but of resolve. She tightened her grip. "Copy that." Her voice came over comms, calm, almost serene. "Hammer 1, this is Valkyrie. Get your men inside and hold. I'll cover you." The SEAL commander's voice cracked. "You don't have the fuel, you don't have." "Doesn't matter," she cut in. "Move." And then she dove. Her jet screamed across the sky, engines coughing fire, wings scorched, systems bleeding sparks. She opened her cannons, tearing into the ridges where enemy fighters massed, her rounds carving dust and flame into the desert. She swooped low, so low the ground blurred beneath her canopy, scattering men who thought themselves safe. Her jet shook, faltered, groaned, but still she pressed forward. The outpost defenders surged, SEALs pouring fire into the gaps she carved. The enemy broke, their lines splintering, their momentum shattered by the storm above. And then finally, the jet gave out. Engines sputtered, hydraulics locked. The stick went heavy in her hands. She fought, teeth gritted, breath ragged, every muscle burning. But some battles you don't win. Some battles you only carry long enough for others to live. Her last words over the comms came soft, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. "Hold the line, you're clear now." Static swallowed her. On the ground, men shouted her name, begging for her voice again. The SEAL commander's eyes burned as he gripped his radio, but no reply came. Above them, a streak of fire cut across the horizon, her jet spiraling away, breaking into smoke and flame that scattered against the dawn. Silence followed, the kind of silence that sears itself into memory. At the outpost, the battle was over. Survivors stood among ruins, panting, bleeding, alive. They looked to the horizon where smoke rose like a monument. Some saluted, some bowed their heads. None spoke. In the command tent, Admiral Warren lowered his headset slowly. His face was pale, his hands trembling though he tried to hide it. Around him, soldiers stared not at him but at the fatting horizon. Respect, raw and unyielding, hung heavy in the air, respect that no rank could demand and no dismissal could erase. The Admiral whispered to himself, words meant for no one. She was Valkyrie. Weeks later, the war rolled on, as wars always do. Missions blurred into missions, names into lists, but some names refused to fade. At bases across the desert, young recruits whispered about the pilot who had flown into the impossible. At villages, children pointed skyward when jets roared, muttering Valkyrie, as if it were both legend and prayer. And among the SEALs, the story lived fiercest. In quiet barracks, overworn playing cards in dim lights, men told of the woman who had stayed in the sky when anyone else would have fled. They spoke of her calm, her voice steady as gunfire tore the world apart. They remembered her not as a rank, not as a casualty, but as something rarer, a presence. One evening at a stateside ceremony, the SEAL commander who had stood with her in the canyon stepped onto a stage. His uniform bore scars of service, his face lined with years of war. Reporters waited for words, cameras hungry for quotes, but he didn't tell stories of tactics or victories. He said only this: "That woman outranked us all." The hall fell silent, and in that silence the truth lingered. Far from the noise, on a coastal cliff where waves hammered rock, a lone jacket lay folded over a stone. Her flight patch, Valkyrie, faded but intact. The wind tugged at the fabric, gulls wheeling above, sunset painting the sea in molten gold. There was no grave, no marker, just the horizon, endless and open, the way she had always lived. And maybe that was fitting. Legends aren't buried, they're carried in memory, in silence, in the lives saved by choices no one else would make. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And when it does, the world remembers.